Bom dia. Tudo bem? Obrigada pela presença, primeiro de tudo. A gente sabe que mobilidade tem sido um desafio nos últimos dias. Então, obrigada por estarem aqui. Essas foram as minhas primeiras palavras e boas-vindas em português. Now, in respect to our guests and the rest of the conversation, I'm going to switch to English here. But welcome. Good morning. This is the last open event of our Expert Summit 2018 edition. So a quick question would be, is there anyone who participated in any other event from Campus Expert Summit? Yes? Okay, a couple hands. Is there anyone who presented an Expert Summit last year? Yes, all right, a few people, a couple residents that have been here with us. So Campus Expert Summit is a program that we do here at campus in which we invite a few Googlers from different places, different offices, different areas of expertise to come to campus and stay here with us for 2 weeks working on specific projects with our startups. And then one element of that program is to actually take advantage of all this knowledge that they have and share that with a broader community. So we host also a couple open events. This is the last one that we are doing in this session, so hopefully it will be good enough for you to leave here like very excited about what will come next year. So this is the end event that we have, and we're actually going to do this in the same format that we've been holding our internal conversations with the startups, which is in a very informal manner. We're here to have a conversation with you and have a chat, so this is what we'll do. I'm Manuela, I'm program coordinator here at campus, and I've been given the task to moderate this conversation today, which with the guests that we have should be very easy and simple to do. So without further ado, I want to invite our guests here today to join me on stage, Matt, Cristina, and Ivan. Please come up. Sit wherever you want to sit, wherever makes you feel comfortable. Matt will do most of the talking, I'm sure, so we can just leave him like on spot. I'm sure you will. So I'll let these guys introduce themselves very soon, but just to give you like a broader context, all of them are like senior tech leads at Google. They come with different backgrounds, they come from different countries, offices, areas within Google. So it'll be very nice to chat to you since you have different perspectives on product matters. And also from very intense past few days, they also have very different personalities, I can tell by now. But there's something that these guys have in common, and I'm assuming that you do too, which is a huge interest and a huge passion for building products and developing products, more specifically products that matter, which is what we'll be talking about today. So before I actually hand it over to you, I wanted to do just like a quick chat on all of you out there so we can start this conversation. So one of the things that we talked about this week is how the responsibility of building good products is actually spread across different people and roles. So to check where you come from, quick question would be, who here in the audience is a startup founder? Good crowd. Who here has the role of a CTO? Okay. Engineers? Designers, UX. Okay. Who here is just interested in the field and wants to learn more about products in a general way? Yay, cool. So I got my crowd here as well. All right, so that said, I think that we have plenty of different people in the audience. So we'll have a good conversation coming from different places. If you guys want to go ahead and just tell them to begin with who you are, what you do, and how did you get here?
Hi. I'm Cristina. I'm from Romania. I work in the London office. My journey is kind of from an engineering background. I started at Google almost 7 years ago, and I started out as an engineer working on kind of back end of maps, restaurants recommendations. After a year there, I kind of really had the passion for working on more front-facing, user-facing products, so I kind of made a move into the Android search team, which I'm still working on now. And there, kind of after working there as an engineer for a couple of years, I started taking a leadership role in the team. And up to now, I'm now leading a team of 30 engineers on this team. So I'm working very closely with product managers and designers and kind of researchers, all kinds of functions, trying to figure out what's the best features and the best product we can deliver for search for our Android users.
Hi, I'm Ivan. I was born in St. Petersburg, Russia. Spent about 20 years there, got my master's in computer physics. After graduation, I realized that I actually love computers more than I do love physics, and I decided to become a software engineer. With that, I moved to Finland, where I spent the next almost 20 years of my life, working in various roles, mostly in software engineering and project management. And that also was the place where I co-founded my first company. I spent with my startup several years, and after that I became a product manager in Google, and now I live in Mountain View, California.
Ivan's also building all those robots that you heard about in the AI and building AI ethically session yesterday. Hello, everyone. It's great to see some familiar faces out there. Some of you are here who were here last year. We did a similar event. On behalf of the three of us, we're very honored that you decided to use your fuel this morning to come here. It's a real pleasure to be here. Yeah, as I said, my name is Matt. I'm actually based in the London office, though from New York originally. I spent about 4 years in our headquarters in Mountain View, California, working on payments and other things in that sphere before switching to London. And now I work in a part of our ads business. And actually, my job has changed quite a bit over that period of time. You know, product managers end up just sort of convincing people to put a button somewhere. And now, as a manager of product managers, I just convince people to put a button on a page. So you'll get a different kind of expertise from me. So thanks for having us.
Okay, so Matt, since you brought up that you were here last year, and we were lucky enough to have you last year and this year again, last year Matt put together this amazing 2-hour presentation on building excellent products. And then now that he's coming back, he was like, oh, I'm not going to do that again. That's on your YouTube channel, so let's just have a conversation. So that's the goal here. The goal is to have conversation, and we'll open for questions. And to actually inspire some of those questions, we have a couple product words back here to get some questions popping in your head. But I'm going to go ahead and start with one. Taking one argument from what you just said, which is you quickly said that you used to put the buttons, convince people to put the buttons, and now manage people to actually make good decisions. So my question to start and kick off this conversation would be, to all of you, when you started working with product, what was your day-to-day like? What kind of activities did you face? What were the challenges back then? And then as that evolved, what is it that you do today? How did that change over time as your career progressed, as the life cycle of the products that you've been working with also got more mature? What is it that it used to be like, and what is it like today?
For me, I think the biggest thing that changed over time is kind of the horizon that I'm thinking about. So when I started out just as an engineer or a tech lead of a small team, we were mostly just worried about how do we make this button look really good and deliver that in time. As I started becoming a team lead and kind of my team's getting bigger, I started, especially once my team was big enough that people on my team were working on different things at the same time, it kind of became clear that I can't just worry about how this button gets done, but also what are these other guys doing? So trying to spend my time making sure both teams have what they need to do their jobs. And now I'm kind of thinking more in okay, everyone knows what they're doing for this quarter, maybe next quarter. I need to figure out what we're going to do next year. Are we going to have enough important work for these 30 people to still be employed and have meaningful jobs a year from now, 3 years from now? And what are kind of the most important problems we need to focus on? So kind of the horizon of where I'm focusing on is what's changed the most.
I think that's a really good answer. I mean, between the two of you, you captured, I think, the two big dimensions that change the nature of your work. The first is what your team needs, right, as it grows in size and scope, et cetera. And the second is sort of where is your product in its life cycle? Are you in an early stage place where you need to spend a lot more time setting a direction, or are you in this late stage, time to launch, iterate quickly? I know in one of the sessions earlier this week, we talked about sort of how that shifts as you grow in your career. at the beginning, you have a problem where the solution might be pretty clear, right? Or at least the first solution is pretty clear. And it's about executing to get there. And then you have this little bit of a shift where you start to have more and bigger problems where the solution is not clear and not everyone agrees on the best way to get there. And you start splitting your time a little bit between that first world and then also between this second world where you're part of defining the requirements and figuring out how to navigate to that. And then I think there's this final stage where you spend even less time on execution, spend a little time defining the requirements, but you start to spend more and more of your time pointing in a direction, as Cristina said, pointing in a direction across a longer time horizon. And the fun part about that is you have so much more flexibility, which can be frightening, so much more flexibility to decide where and how your team and the products that you're working on develop. And I think that's where the job gets really, really interesting.
To build on what Matt and Cristina said, I think product managers sometimes can be described as jacks of all trades and masters of none. You really have to figure out where your team lacks guidance, lacks direction, what are the gaps, and you're not expected to fill these gaps and fill these holes yourself. As a product manager, product leader, you're really expected to figure out what is the right solution, who are the right people to come on board, who you need to ask for advice, and how to unblock the decisions and the direction of the product or the company that you're building.
Let me see if I understand. You move from like a more specific and technical type of activity to a broader, with more flexibility but bigger risks, like decision-making scenario, right? So tell me more a little bit about what are the skills and expertise that you have to have throughout the process, like for beginning and actually putting something together that you want to launch and test, to actually being able to get past that, land a product, and then manage people to actually make the right decisions regarding the product.
So as Matt was describing, your role evolves during different life stages of the company, or even a product if it's just one of the products inside of a larger company. I think one of the most critical skills is going to be communication. You need to make sure that everyone in the team is on the same page with regards to what is the overall direction, where are we going, what is the vision for the product, and what's the mission of the company. If everyone agrees on these basic principles, then this always can be the directions that you can go back to, the statements that you can go back to in order to figure out whether the decision that you're making is the right decision or the wrong decision. These are the guiding principles. So I would highlight communication as probably one of the most important things. And what do you guys think?
I mean, I would never be able to oversell how important communication is as well. I also want to use a term that I think we've been talking about a lot this week, which is storytelling. And I know you've had some sessions with some of the other experts about the importance of that. And I think that's really where great product leaders shine, is their ability to tell a story. And that's because you're telling a story to so many different audiences. You're telling a story to your team about where you're going and why. You're telling a story to your customers about why they should care about your product at all. You're telling a story to investors, for those of you who are founders, about why they should put their hard-earned money behind you. That actually is a huge part of the job. And just linking it to the day-to-day, sort of being able to communicate fluidly, to all the different stakeholders involved in actually making a product work, being that expensive router, that person who can translate between different functions, is all wrapped up in communication. I think I'll add just two more that I think are really important to me. One is judgment, right? And that's a hard thing. There's no class for that. I think it's one of the great reasons why we're all here having this conversation, is because there is no class to develop product judgment. But that is really important, right? I mean, you guys spend a lot of your time thinking about, well, what should I invest in today? What should I invest my team's time in today? Should we do feature A or feature B? Should I pivot the product or change strategy? This all requires you to have good judgment, right? And to balance the competing needs of your users and other stakeholders and your timeline and your runway, and I could go on and on. And so focusing on having good judgment, how you spend your time, how you spend your team's time, is, I think, another big part of the skill set. And the final thing I would say is empathy. And what I mean by empathy is just being in tune with your users and being in tune with your team, because people will look to you to set the tone. In every meeting you have, in every decision you make, and in every way you tell a story to your users, you have to be a great listener, and you have to develop an empathy, right? I think that's part of what makes you good at your job.
Anything?
I was going to say very similar things. I was going to say focusing always on the problem you're trying to solve, which I think comes back to kind of the communication and storytelling. Don't focus too much on what you're doing right now, but where you want to get, and let your team come up with solutions to get you there. And yeah, kind of coming back to communication, energizing your team. I think we have very different personalities, and I would be curious to see how we work in our day-to-day, because I know this guy's a like stand-up comedian, you're like very technical, and I would build whatever you tell me to build. And I feel like I'm more kind of going through the people relationships. I'm trying to understand each person and why they're here and what they're trying to build. But so that can look in very different ways, but having that kind of drive to energize the teams to get behind where you're trying to go, I think is the most important skill in a leader.
Slightly disappointed though. Because last year, that question came up, and you said that it was very necessary to have some dance moves going. And I was expecting that I could ask you to demonstrate. That was actually in my script. So now I failed. I have to come up with something different.
No.
No dance moves required. No, I'm joking. Jokes apart. So the way I see what you're saying is like a lot of communicating, a lot of storytelling, a lot of getting people in the right direction. So there's a lot on what to do, the way I see it. Like, what is the target? What is the product vision? And it's more about what and where than it becomes about how, like how to get there. So a question would be, as you move from specific to more broader skills, how do you balance pointing the right target, giving directions and instructions, but also giving your teams autonomy and the liberty to decide on how to get there? How do you balance that leadership with their autonomy and make sure that they actually had the right way? With no dance moves.
This is when we look awkwardly at each other and go, that was kind of hard. What do you know?
Sorry, am I going too fast?
So actually, we've gone through this exercise with some of you this week about how you spend your time. And to quote, almost every time we've gone through that exercise, it's been, we're just fighting fires, we're trying to get through the day, I'm not sure we're on the right track. So I think part of this is just a natural part of your progression in your career, where you move from a stage of, I can increase my impact by simply doing more work, right? That's where you start. To a place where actually that's impossible. Like, you're responsible for too much, your portfolio is too big, things are moving too fast, your team is too large. And you really have to get good at experimenting with what you can safely drop on the ground. But you also have to get good at figuring out how you can scale your impact, right? And scale your impact through your team and the people who are around you, and what kind of decisions you can make that actually help to activate your team and get you out of some of the activities that you no longer have time to do. And there's a lot of benefit in that, because a part of being a product leader is also making sure you enable your experts to do their best work, right? If you're doing everything under the sun, you're actually inhibiting their growth and development too. So one exercise that I would recommend you go through is take a week and look at how you spend your time, and figure out how that matches up against your values of how you want to be spending your time, and where your strengths and weaknesses lie, and where the strengths and weaknesses of your team lies. And that really should show you if there's an imbalance. And you'll know things are working better, that there is no imbalance, when you can point in a direction and people will follow, right? And you can start to gain trust, gain confidence that your team is going to follow in the right way and match your expectations of how you would have done it yourself. And then I think that's when you know that you're being the right kind of leader.
So I think one of the biggest challenges, especially when you start in your own company, is letting go and delegating the responsibility to other people. This is really one of the most critical skills that you'll have to learn if you haven't learned it yet, because as Matt described, that eventually you hit a point where you just cannot do it all yourself, either because you are not an expert in certain fields or just because you keep running out of time. And I guess the first signal to something that's going wrong is that you have a lot of busy work. You never have time. This is really a point where you need to take a step back and start thinking about how to reorganize your company, how to reorganize your own life. Being able to delegate, especially in the beginning, this transition from an individual contributor to a leader is extremely difficult. But once you have completed that transition, everyone will be happier. You will be happier because you will have more time on your hands and you will be able to focus on more important things. And also your team will be happier because they will have autonomy and they will be able to make decisions for themselves. And essentially your goal would be to grow the next generation of leaders in your company that will allow you to scale. So I think that this is one of the most important things really that you'll have to learn as you're transitioning from just starting something and either imagining the product or coding it on your laptop and trying to figure out how it's going to look like, to building an organization and building a team around it.
I think as a people manager, like, you also need to think about the growth of everyone in your team actively. So trying to have everyone in your team be like at least 20% outside of their comfort zone. Some people will be comfortable with more than that or less than that. Excuse me. But looking at your team, like, make sure you see where that 20% is. And if it isn't there, maybe it's something that you can give from yourself to them, or maybe there's other skills and directions they want to grow. But thinking of that actively would also enable you to think about, once you've figured out if your activities are all best done by yourself or maybe other people in your team, and that also will give you time for yourself to think about the next thing you should tackle.
This analogy of like being a router and getting stuff out of people's plates so they can actually perform. And I think that that's a good guideline when you're trying to decide on what to delegate and what not to. I do have tons of questions on top of that in my mind, but I see some faces like nodding and other people just seem to be very far away here on their computers. So I kind of want to bring people closer in the way that I want you to start asking a few questions, especially because a lot of people here participated in other conversations that we've had this week regarding products. So I know that you all have question marks there too. So who wants to go first and join our conversation here?
We're very friendly. We don't bite. And you get to catch this cool microphone.
And you can throw that away as long as it's
right
on the catch box. Is the catch box on? Yes, no? Yeah, so you can throw this around. It's made for that. You can only need to be gentle. And I can just throw and get someone, whoever gets it will have to ask a question.
We have a brave first questioner here.
Is it on? Okay. Hi. So this is my first session on products, and I wanted to throw out a softball. How do you guys define products? Because I work more in like the service industry, so I'm trying to figure out if that could also be a product.
You differentiate that from projects as well could be a good question.
It's always, the minute you said, I'm going to throw out a softball, I was like, it's going to be hard. All right, I'm going to fall on the sword. This will give you time to think, two of you, okay?
Speak slowly.
Yeah. So I guess I'll describe how I do it and then try to make it more generally. So at the moment, my team is responsible for a discrete business. And that means we've got responsibility for a bottom line, we've got responsibility for a set of features and a set of products that sit under a portfolio. For me, it's actually like sort of a simple thing at the moment. But our product has an impact on an ecosystem, like in my case, ads. And it has an impact on other Google products that my team does not have a responsibility to manage. So that's where some of the complexity comes in, is in, how do the decisions that my team make affect the rest of Google, affect other Google products, affect my colleagues, that kind of thing. I think just moving from specific to general, and we talked about this a little last week, defining product is sort of an approach. Like the team, how you actually operate as a product leader and what your team does is an approach to a problem that you've chosen, a problem that you've scoped. And maybe the solution to that problem is a feature, maybe it's an experiment, maybe it's a a suite of products, a platform, what have you. I know many of you are moving up and down the spectrum. So maybe some answer to your question is we define the problem we want to solve, and then there's a whole suite of activities we would do under that that may consist of one or more products to actually solve that problem. I don't know if you guys want to add to.
Yeah, for me, it's fairly fluid as well, especially coming from the engineering background. I guess I was always thinking like, oh, I need to work on a thing that it's like an app that's great, that's very clear and easy to think about as a whole and understand. But for me, I think as long as you kind of have users that are using something you're creating, I feel like I put that under the umbrella of product. And yeah, kind of come back to like, what are you trying to solve for them, and kind of having that back and forth from the think about the user, think about the problem, think about the solutions you're trying to make. I feel like that's what I call a product. I don't know if that's an official definition, but.
Is that something you guys struggle with?
Yeah, so I just have like a consulting service, but I'm trying to define it better. So I'm thinking of if I described it as a product, then maybe that would help to, like outline some parameters of the services that I give.
So I can add to that, and I work in a special group of Google, which is Google Research. So essentially, what we do, we build technologies that are then consumed by other teams and other product areas inside the company. Sometimes what we struggle with is that we have a technology in search of a user, and a user would not necessarily be an end user. It would be a team inside the organization that can benefit from the technologies that researchers and software engineers and Google Research create. We go from defining the problem and imagining what kind of problems we potentially can solve and trying to bring that to our internal customers. So when it comes to consultancy, I think that our job is sometimes very, very close to being consultants, not externally, internally, and trying to explain how technology can help other teams and other products launch new functionality for the users. Sometimes we go in the opposite direction and we look at the problems that other product areas experience, and we try to help them understand how the technologies that we potentially can develop can benefit them in order to improve or solve some of the user problems. Defining the technology as a product, however, makes a lot of sense. So it's a very good approach when you can just stimulate the imagination of your potential customers and say that, hey, you can build this and this and this. And the product that we are selling, depending on what specifically you do, is going to be a platform that you're creating, a specific technology wrapped into the product packaging, or it can even be a product demo that you have completely built and executed.
Yeah, I have Eartha ringing in my head, actually, once you said consulting services, which is the what's in it for me model, right? Like when you provide a service, a useful way to start framing what you offer to the world is who is it for, right? So one of, and I'll leave them out so I don't call anyone out, but there's a startup currently here that provides sort of a suite of services kind of under an umbrella of new technology, as Ivan was saying. And some of the migration they've made in talking about their products or their platform is about who this is for, right? This is for users, this is for businesses, this is for... So I think that could be a way to help you storytell about this is what we do, this is who we are, and this is you, user, how you can use us.
A lot that we've been talking about this week is less about what is it that the product specifically is, and more how to have a product mindset and like a product culture. So in that way of thinking that as a culture and possible processes that connect the dots to that culture, is there any other piece of advice that you give, any processes or way to think of it as a cycle in order to offer something, improve that offering, iterate, make it better, that you could share?
So I think you hit on a couple of important things there. One was kind of going back to this autonomy question, so that the teams can have the flexibility to move within their sphere. And I think the other one is about process. And I think this is where you'll see just how big Google is, about how I think the three of our organizations will follow vastly different day-to-day processes. On the delegation autonomy front, right? I think once your team is humming along and is a well-functioning product org, you want to point in the direction and then give the teams the maximum flexibility to figure out their own destiny, right? And usually that requires, and this to link it to the process, usually that requires all deciding up front how we're going to measure success, right? What do we care about? And all deciding up front, our goal, our vision. The vision may change over time, but now, we've decided who we are and what our priorities are. And then I think once you do that, the teams can absorb more flexibility because they will know how to measure their success. They'll know how to prioritize because you've done all this work up front. From a process standpoint, I think what will link our answers together is we operate on a sort of mostly a quarterly or biannual basis in terms of setting targets and goals, and then within that, we'll all have different metrics that matter in mind depending on the area in which we're working in. But we certainly, from a process standpoint, don't have any silver bullets.
Questions? No questions.
Also, as you catch the catch box, please recalibrate what you think is a softball question.
You guys talked a lot about communication and having to persuade people. Could you maybe give us an example of some time you had to persuade someone within your team or one of your partners and what that looked like?
That's an excellent question. So product managers and actually a lot of people in Google are expected to lead without authority. That's probably one of the most challenging things you have to deal with. So you really have to be innovative, and you need to find individual approach. Usually what works best is bringing data to the table, because as long as you can quantify the problem that you're trying to solve and you're on top of the metrics that matter, the conversation is not just an exchange of opinions. I believe that's important. No, I don't believe that's important, but rather a conversation around numbers. And then it brings everyone to the same page, and it simplifies a lot of arguments. Because then if you have a dollar sign in front of a certain number, you can argue whether this is big enough or small enough. And usually every organization has some kind of benchmark what's important. If you have the number of users as a metric, then also you can argue about whether this is an important thing to work on or not. And then from there, you just continue discussing numbers rather than just opinions.
Yeah, I mean, Ivan's exactly right. I would say it's a daily struggle. I'll give a scary example. Steve Jobs used to say that he was as proud of what his team decided not to build as what they did build. I had a recent example where my boss came to me asking our team to build something or to work on this specific project, and I said no. Right? Like I know that sounds silly, but it's not easy to say no to your boss, And we all have different versions of what boss means, right? Like it's not easy to say no to your founders. It's not easy to say no to the VCs when they want you to go in a different direction, right? Your investors. But I'm super proud of that decision, right? Like I had a responsibility to do the right thing for my team, and for better or for worse, like I thought that was right. How do you go about doing that? So data is certainly one. I think the other thing would also be thoughtful about when you choose to do something, you're actually implicitly making a decision to not do a whole bunch of other things. And I think that's actually the part that people forget about the argument, is it's not about saying no and then your team doesn't do anything, right? There actually is a huge opportunity cost, especially for small teams, especially for startups. Every time you choose to do something, you're not doing something else. And you should think about what those things that you're not doing are if you choose to do something. Because A, that'll give you more confidence in your decision, right? If you still choose the same at the end of that exercise. And B, if you don't choose the same, right, you'll have asked yourself some really hard questions about whether you made the right call.
I also want to add a small tip, I guess, on like some of this process. I feel like for single decision points, like metrics is definitely the way to go. I also like to have like a, I don't know, kind of like a to-do list of changes or ideas I want to, like, especially for ones that take, longer time. It's not something that you decide together, but something you want to, a change you want to create over time. You should just have a small list, like, these are the 3 important things I want to get people to understand, and then looking at those in every meeting, or even mapping out who are the stakeholders that I need to be on board with those things, and then just kind of having those in the back of my head as the underlying thread that I need to bring up with people over time throughout different meetings, and kind of looking, do I feel like this concept is now clearly understood by everyone, or have I done enough sharing of this to check it off the box? And I might have some of these concepts on for like weeks until I feel like everyone is on the same page.
So you touched on a point, which is know when to say no, right? Which comes in hand with like having a checklist. And pretty much that's a challenge that I see a lot of people struggling with, which at the end of the day is prioritization, right? How do I choose what to do and what not to do? And especially some of the business in here struggle with that. Like, what do I choose? How do I prioritize? Especially when it's a challenge for everyone, but especially when they are B2B, they have big clients that actually represent a big part of their revenue at the end of the month. So that's the idea of like, that's my boss, right? It's my big client. I want to please it, but how far can I go being under business pressure, different requests? What can we share with them in terms of prioritization and making the right decisions, and how to weight all the possibilities that I have and actually picking the ones that I believe will be tied to the product's success?
That's a great question. We have discussed the prioritization probably with every startup that I had a chance to meet with in the past few days. It's one of the most critical skills for a product leader or for an organization leader to be able to clearly prioritize. Usually it always helps to go back to the vision and the mission of the company. These are going to be the driving statements that will help you guide your decisions, and that will help everyone in your team understand why certain decisions were made. I know that for some of you, especially as Manu said, that you have large customers, and sometimes sending an invoice and getting the money from that customer is going to guarantee a payroll for the entire company for the next few months. So that can also be one of the prioritization factors. You definitely have the standard techniques for prioritization, where you just define the important factors for you, and then you just stack rank all the features that you want to work on, all the directions you want to pursue, using a preset or predefined criteria. That can be complexity of implementation, can be the impact, it can be the revenue generated, and so on. You will define those based on what your company cares about the most at the current stage of development. One other important thing when you think about prioritization, you should make sure that you do not sacrifice the vision of the company when you are deciding to pursue some side tracks. It is always a fine balance, but in the end, it should make sense. You should not go somewhere where your vision does not instruct you to go. At the same time, it is possible that you might want to review the vision, and if all the customers are telling you that we want something else, then that might be a right moment in the life cycle of the company to actually reevaluate your vision and see whether you're going in the right direction.
So vision is always clear, right? We always know what the vision of the company is. Does there anyone here struggles with like the vision of my company? Okay, maybe we can switch this around, and then you guys can tell us a little bit. But anyways, we're talking too much. I want more questions coming from you. Anna in the back there.
Come on, Eartha. You got this.
Oh.
Just be careful so the microphone doesn't actually come out of the box, because that could hurt.
Okay. That was as well as that could have gone.
Anna from Guppy here. How do you know whether you made a wrong decision, and how do you deal with it? Like, okay, I did a wrong decision because it's not clear, the path, as you mentioned. How do you measure that, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, I think you want to build in mechanisms for you to know you've made the wrong decision as early as possible. I don't know if you guys read things like Lean Startup and that sort of thing, but having this concept of any decision you're making also immediately set the checkpoint where you're going to know by this time if we're here, we're in the right direction. If we're not, we made the wrong decision at this point. So I don't think there's like a magic thing when you know, or if you don't plan that, it's going to be too late by the time you figure it out. So I would recommend as soon as you make decisions, also think about what metrics are going to tell you that you've made the right or wrong decision and when you want to check in on that.
Yeah, I would also say just like get comfortable right now that a large portion of your decisions will be wrong. I know that sounds like a little bit of a platitude, but the vast majority of product decisions you will make will be 51-49 decisions, right? Like, and I think once I internalized that, I started to feel a lot less frightened. And I think it's also worth pointing out the cost of not making a decision. I think it's one of the things that I know Ivan and I see with more junior folks in the PM role is they're so insistent on getting every decision right that actually they cause a great amount of stress and strife and wasted resources in increasing their confidence level. But it's actually just false precision at some point. And there's a great cost to your org of not making a call. Now, if you have the structures in place that Cristina is describing, that you all agree on how we're going to measure success and when and how frequently, then you actually reduce the downside risk to just making a call. And I think that's really the sweet spot. And I'll just call something that's like a couple of words up there is sort of this idea of strong opinions held weakly, right? You as a leader also should model that behavior of, yes, I've got a strong vision, but I'm humble enough to recognize when new information changes the assumptions that I have. And part of developing a strong team where everyone feels sort of safe to take risks is modeling that type of behavior, right? Admitting when you're wrong, right? Telling everyone how you're going to do better next time, right? And putting in the structures in place to make it so that when your teammates are faced with a similar position, they feel even safer making those kinds of decisions.
Also, another tip, putting my manager hat on, if you can, to be as transparent as you can about how you made that decision, what factors went into that, and if you feel like you have a strong team that will get behind that, you'll also have so many more eyes to tell you that, well, remember why we made this decision, we thought this is true, and they can also kind of help you catch things that are going the wrong way sooner.
And to add a couple of things to that, the guys are absolutely right. You will make a lot of decisions, and a lot of them will be wrong. There is nothing problematic with that. That's going to happen. That's inevitable. But an important thing is to know how to evaluate it, and I think that was a part of your question. How do you know when you made the right decision? Defining metrics and monitoring them all the time will help you understand whether the decisions you're making are moving you into the right direction. And it's important to know where do you want to get before you make the decision. So you don't need to know why are you making this decision or what are you expecting to happen as the outcome of that. And another bit is more related to the culture of the team, and I think it's important to start building that and instilling this culture from the very beginning. At Google, we have the culture of postmortems. We definitely make a lot of decisions that are bad decisions, that are wrong decisions. When we realize that something went wrong, it's important to go back and understand what was it exactly that we did wrong in order to try and avoid making the same mistake in the future. And the culture of transparency, the culture of trying to not blame someone for making a wrong decision, but trying to understand what went wrong and what we could have done better is extremely important.
Other questions here in the back. Good catch.
So one of the things that my team at Google struggles with, and I think maybe some of the startups are struggling with, is knowing how many people need to be signing off when you make a decision. So like I think when you start small, it's like easy to get 2 people to agree, and then all of a sudden you're waiting for 15 people to agree, which just slows things down. So how do you kind of set the limits and like draw boundaries on when things get decided and who really needs to be involved?
That's too hard. Any other questions? No, but really. Yeah, I don't know. How many of you folks in the room struggle with that problem too? Yeah, and the rest of you have shoulder issues. Yeah, I mean, we definitely struggle with that too. I'll throw out two things on my side and give these folks ample time to think of something too. So one is about whose opinion is missing from the table that I think would be beneficial to the final outcome. So this is the positive side of your question rather than the bureaucratic side. The positive side being, okay, I look around the room, whose opinion, whose expertise isn't represented at the table. And I think part of being a product leader is looking around and having the wherewithal, even in the midst of everything that you're responsible for, to recognize and develop a sensitivity to whose voice isn't being heard, which kind of expertise am I missing from the table, what kind of new ideas are lacking from what the decision we're about to make. And there's a lot of power in that. And this will be one of many call-outs for having a diverse team, but also an inclusive team, right? Having a diverse room where not everyone feels safe to share their opinions or challenge your ideas is you're only getting half the expertise. That's the positive side. The negative side, I think, is communicating upfront how a decision is going to get made and how a proposal will be evaluated. I think, if you have one end of the spectrum, which is consensus, right, and everyone needs to agree, and then on the other end of the spectrum, you have, I'm not going to listen to anyone, I'm just going to make the decision myself. In most cases, neither of those extremes is going to work, right? Maybe on the smallest possible decisions, you can get away with something like this. But even on the largest possible decisions, consensus is almost never going to happen, right? Like, Larry Page, one of our founders, always said, consensus is not the goal in a meeting. A decision maker should always be present. But within that gray area, there's lots of important distinctions as well, right? I'll give 2. One is a consultative decision, right, where it's I have a proposal, I have a plan, but I want to consult everyone on this and get feedback and get some improvements that will help optimize this, that will help everyone feel more comfortable with it. The other kind would be more of a disagree and commit model, which is, this is the proposal, I want to tell everyone about it. Unless there are any serious show-stopping objections, right, this is what we're going to do. Both of those are valid, but you need to tell people up front what room they're in, right? Like where they're sitting, what kind of decision this is going to be, and how everyone should be participating. I think if you can clarify that for people, they'll start to understand and predict how you're going to make decisions, and will know how to give you feedback when future problems come along. So to make it really concrete, like with my team, as we were talking about before, any decision we make actually really affects some of our other ecosystem partners. But now that we've had, years of working together, those other partner teams can have some insight into the way my team is going to make decisions, and they know the best way to give us feedback. Is it, to ask to be an approver? Is it to provide this kind of insight sooner and when in the process and that kind of thing? And I think once those expectations have been set, it's become a bit easier. I rambled a little, so you guys must have something else to say.
I was just going to mention this kind of 3, we like things in 3, like three-player model when you're making a decision, like the actual people that need to make the decision, the stakeholders. If somebody here says no, then we're not going to go ahead with this. Kind of who needs to be consulted, who can provide meaningful input to make this decision better, and then who needs to be informed, which I think is the last part that can go wrong a lot at Google. Like, you've made a decision, you started moving in a direction, but you didn't inform all the people that need to know about this decision. So kind of trying to map out those three types of people and going that way.
I'll also add into that, like team-wise, I think that if you start from the beginning and set early in the game what success is, and then when you come to the conversation, you bring what Ivan mentioned, which is bring the numbers, then there's less convincing to do. Then you might not reach consensus, but you have enough reason to make a decision and then move ahead. But that ties us back into metrics, like what are the numbers that you're looking at so you can actually build a case and know if you're making a right or a bad decision. And is there any sort of advice, like for people that are here more mature and for those that are beginning or like at MVP stage, is there any sort of guideline to follow in terms of what metrics to look for and to look at the beginner stage and then a more mature stage in terms of product metrics or business metrics? Is there any piece of advice in a more general way in what to look for and when?
So when it comes to metrics, I guess it's going to be extremely product-specific, extremely business-specific. Metrics are not, like, there is no universal book of metrics that you should all implement. It really comes from what do you care about as a business? What do you care about when it comes to users? What is the most important thing? I'm sure revenue will be somewhere there, but you always have to look at the numbers relative to something. I think more important than specific metrics is the correct approach to metrics and avoiding common pitfalls, such as, for example, looking at the absolute number of users that you have on this new service that you launched. And it might be growing in a very nice manner, but at the same time, if you're ignoring the fact that most of the users never stay and all the growth comes just from the fact that you have new users coming in all the time on the platform, and you're forgetting about how many users are leaving the platform, that might be a mistake. There is a number of techniques that are useful when thinking about metrics, when defining them. So I guess which metrics to care about, you probably know better than any advice we can give you, but it's important to avoid the pitfalls and work with numbers in a very careful manner.
I don't have a useful answer, but I can just share a bit of our story on the search app, just to kind of put you at ease if you haven't figured out your metrics correctly. So kind of 6 years ago when I joined this team, we were kind of this small team in the Android ecosystem, just like 10 engineers that decided to build like a bit of a search functionality into Android. The Android ecosystem was just starting as well, and we didn't really have any metrics or like amazing roadmap or knowing what we're doing. We just kind of went with our instinct of what we think is the next cool thing. So we just kind of knew how many installs we had in our app, and it was a good number. So we were happy with that success and just kind of looking that we push more things into the app and kind of this number goes up, it's kind of good. And at some point, we decided to look at like, so how many queries are actually coming through this app, right? And it's like, oh, that's kind of like a significant percentage of the search overall traffic, which kind of started shifting into this conversation with the actual search org. It's like, oh, wait, this is kind of bringing a lot of money in. And they kind of took us under their umbrella. Search was already like a very mature product, so they kind of taught us all their methodology of having kind of metrics and where to look at. So today, after we adopted all that, we kind of have insane detail on everything that's happening and kind of having A/B testing, and each change we make completely understand how each query and which users we're affecting. So don't feel too bad if you don't have like the amazing dashboard with all the metrics that you're kind of need to make every decision. We've all been there. Just keep in mind that that's important and you should figure it out at some point, but don't panic.
Yeah, Christina's 100% right. Like, I think, and she's also right about us liking things in threes. You have to be curious I think this is where curiosity, I think, is another important thing for a product leader. You're going to look at metrics. You need to be curious about what's behind them. You need to spend the time to explore what's going on, right? Like in our product, we saw at one point all of this revenue growth, and we were all super excited. It wasn't until we dug in, right, that we actually understood where that was coming from and like what that was being created, and we realized that actually none of the projects we were working on had anything to do with the revenue growth we were seeing, and I think that was a big revelation and totally changed how we were spending our time. I think the other thing that you really need is to feel agency in defining what success means to you, right? You'll get a lot of pressure from funders and from many of the experts you talked about what your metrics are, but you need to make sure that this is linked to your story, right? The storytelling that you do, your concept of what success is, you need to be vocal about that and make sure that that flows into your metrics as well. The last thing I would say is, and I think this comes back to the pitfalls that Ivan was talking about, it's too often that people start with something they can measure. And what they find actually is 6 months later that nobody has any idea what that number is and nobody cares about it anymore and nobody's looking at it anymore, even if they have it in a dashboard. So start the process by actually sitting down with you and the rest of your leads and your team and speaking in human terms about what evidence would lead you to believe that you were being successful, right? Don't use a word, don't use a metric yet, right? Talk in human terms about how would we know that we were being successful. And then go to the process of defining what a signal for that would look like. Again, in human terms. It would mean that users were doing this kind of thing, right? Then worry about how to measure that, right? I think if you do that process, take that kind of diligence in thinking about it, you'll be far more likely to care about that metric 6 months, a year from now. And you'll also be far more likely to have it link closely to the story you want to tell everyone else around you.
After I take it all the 7 certificates, the Google certificates, I'm really more confused about what we're going to be my best products. So this year I started my digital market consulting. So I don't know if you have any tips or suggestions because I'm really worried about that. So I don't really know what's going to be my best products, or how can I identify my best side or the best side about my company? Because I know a little bit about display, SEO, and publicity on Google and search and everything. So I don't really know how to start or what the market really want about the general digital marketing strategy.
So are you saying that you're struggling figuring out where to spend your time and investment to improve performance, or you have a suite of products and you're trying to figure out?
Yes, to identify the best products to start, the communication and the best products I can offer to the market about the general strategy marketing.
So I think the first thing is to make sure that you have regular interaction with your users, right? Obviously, research is a big component of figuring out if you're working on something worth working on, but it doesn't just stop at the beginning, right? I think it's a constant check and balance on whether you're moving in the right direction. So I'd make sure that you're constantly observing your users in your space to make sure that you're not just getting feedback on what you're offering them, but you're also just sort of observing how they behave without a product in front of them. And I think the other piece is dovetails nicely with this conversation about metrics, is which metrics matter to you, and when you put the suite of products in front of those metrics, which ones are rising and falling, and do you believe any of the answers that are coming out of that? Is that something that you've been doing? Is sort of measuring the performance of those products against some metrics?
No, because I don't really start it. all the time I'm thinking about what's the best products, and I start it and stop it, and start it, another one, and stop it. I think, no, this is not good. This is not the really products that matter.
So you're kind of struggling with finding product market fit and figuring out. Yeah, I think that is an absolute persistent challenge. I think when launching anything new, at the moment, say Cristina and we have products that actually at this point have millions of users at this point. So there's a core product market fit challenge that we no longer have to deal with, even though it's something we still think about as we launch any new features. I think there's a couple of things to help in general find product market fit that are useful. Two of which everyone thinks about, and one of which people forget. So one is there a market worth serving, right? And I think that's actually the one that people forget. They're quick to come up with a solution for a problem, but they actually don't think too much about how big is this market? Is it a market worth serving? Is it a market that is stable enough where anything I come up with will make a difference? I think the second thing is this an actual problem that users have, right? And is this a problem that I can solve with technology? And then finally, do I have the tech and the people to actually do it, to actually solve this problem? And I think if you have all three of those things, then you'll see the universal sign for product market fit, which is the product is coming off the shelves without you doing anything about it, right? I think that's how you know that you've found product market fit, is your users are actually just climbing the walls to get more of it.
What are the tools and apps you use to get in touch with your team and to develop new products, to think about new products? Do you have specific tools and apps?
I think that there is no one specific tool that we use. Notepad is good as a start, just a piece of paper and a pencil. That works. A whiteboard universally works. If you have a new idea that you want to discuss, that's super convenient. It's very easy to visualize. If you ask about any specific tools that we use internally, I think every team pretty much comes up with their own set of tools that they need at any specific life stage of the product. Essentially, whatever works for a certain group of people is the tool.
Was your question what tools we use to get in touch with our users, or the people on?
Users and your team.
Okay, I can answer a bit about the users. I was sharing this earlier in the week with the residents. We developed this thing we call the user research train. So we kind of have three components that we're trying to get really kind of structured about doing. So at the highest level, we have what we call immersions. So we try to do this twice a year. For us, that means going to India or Brazil and really sitting down with users in their houses and interviewing them for hours to really understand how they're using the product, our product or other products, how their life really works, kind of what you're saying. So maybe for you, it means going and sitting with the companies you're kind of interacting with or the companies you want to interact with, and just really observing them, what they do day to day, what are some of their challenges. This kind of work will give you kind of insight and research information for you to kind of use as ammunition throughout we use it for half a year, maybe you do this once a year, to really go back and say, these are the problems these people are facing. Am I doing anything about them? Am I in the position to fix those problems for them? Then we have a monthly cohort study. So this is for the products that we already kind of believe in will solve some of these problems. We'll have a group of people use them for a month and kind of get feedback from them of this is actually something that will help with some of these problems. This is for quite a mature kind of feature that we've already thought through. And then we also have what we try to do twice a week is just kind of very lightweight user studies. So we just have people come into our labs in our office, and we try to think ahead, like, what are some random things? Like, it really doesn't have to be super precise. It can just be like brainstorming. Everyone in the team can participate in this. What are some things that we think could help with anything that we've seen in the broader research? Maybe just like a feature idea, maybe just add a button here, maybe you just change a text, the way you present something, and have the people that come into the lab go through a script to answer those questions, just to kind of give you like the cheapest possible yes or no, you're going in the right direction, this is something you might want to look into. So we use this kind of user studies to kind of perfect and iterate for some of the features that we'll do with the cohort monthly study. So we try to be very kind of structured, of being super in touch with our users in this kind of multiple ways. And because in the cheapest possible one, the whole team can get involved, and obviously we share the results from all the other ones. It's a good way to kind of have this good vicious cycle of kind of knowing your users and kind of think about that continuously.
So one very common question is, you already told about the metrics, but one common question is, what's the good enough product to launch? And sometimes people feel that you have some criterias and you don't have, so how you engage your people inside, and what kind of criterias you guys define to have a good enough product to launch?
I think the answer to this question will greatly depend on at what stage your company is at right now. If you are talking about a major corporation with billions of users, then you probably want to launch something that meets expectations of these billions of users, which is going to be an extremely diverse crowd. If you're a startup and you're just launching the first version of the product, and your main goal there is not to maintain the user base, but to validate the product market fit, validate your ideas, then I think the usual guidance there is you should launch a product that you will be embarrassed about. But the earlier you launch, the better, because you will be able to start testing the product market fit as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously we've spent a lot of time with this group talking about what a minimum viable product means, and is that still like a relevant concept? And, you know, there's certainly been I think a strong push about improving on that concept and saying it's not something that should just be viable. It should be something that, you know, still delights users, right? Is still something that, you know, is still something that you can feel good about. And I think there is a lot of important takeaways from that concept. I think you know, we should move fast and break things, and you know, we should launch some things that you know, have a long way to go, knowing that we will iterate on them. But it is important that the product you launch out there will build and maintain the trust of your early users, right? And will sort of respect their time and respect their investment. And I think, you know, just sort of two things I would think about as you try to find that sweet spot, both of which are impossible to measure. One is, do users know where I'm going, right, with that first launch? Do they have enough in that first product so that they can see and predict and feel like how this product will develop over time? That's usually like a good sign that you're respecting their time. If they recognize that, you know, oh yeah, it doesn't do this right now, but clearly they're going to add this, right? That actually brings them in. It doesn't alienate them. I think the other thing, and Ivan put this very well, is you better make sure that the first thing you launch helps answer your question, right? And I think I used to use this term called, what is your next riskiest assumption? So you have a concept of your vision, and you're on a path toward that vision. What is the next thing you're most worried about? What is your riskiest assumption about how the world works and about, you know, its appetite for your product? You better make sure that that next launch reflects that.
I liked the example that you used last week with the cupcakes. Like, you need to make sure that you're launching, if you're up to making cupcakes, that you launch a cupcake. It doesn't have to be the biggest one. It doesn't have to have all flavors. It doesn't have to have all sorts of frosting, but it needs to be a cupcake so someone can actually taste it. So I like that. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here from like specific product decisions, but from the perspective of people that are responsible for product success. What are general technology trends that we should all be looking at to make better decisions considering a near future?
Yeah, and by the way, the three of us are super excited to hear what you guys think about this as well, because we're all in this field at this point, and we've changed roles and technologies we've been working on, and so are very sensitive to how the world is changing. I think I'll answer this question by saying what keeps me up at night, what worries me. I think the first is about how little I understand about everyone who isn't even online yet. The billion or so people that use Google's products and are in the digital economy today, it's not really clear to me how different they look from the next billion, the next 3 billion that come online elsewhere. If you think about what some of their experience is likely to be, those coming online in the future, they're likely to skip desktop computers entirely, right? That simply won't be a thing. It will be a mobile-only transition. It will be wearables, Internet of Things. They'll have a totally different experience growing up with technology. The extent to which we don't understand what their needs will be, what problems they'll face, those are massive blind spots for us. I think the other thing that worries me is actually about empathy, which is, we build products, and some of the metrics we use to measure success is, our users spent more time staring at this screen or engaging with our content. I don't have an answer to this question, but is that a good thing, right? I mean, many of you have been on your phones or are on your phones right now. This concept of digital well-being, right? If we increase screen time, are we positively impacting humanity? I don't have an answer to that question. And I think that's why I brought up the idea of, in the MVP, is are you respecting your user? If you're getting them to spend more time on their phone, or getting them to connect or change the way they connect with other people, did you make things better or worse? I don't know. But I think it's something that we should all keep in mind. I think the final thing, and I'm excited to hear Ivan's thoughts on this, as he led a presentation on this yesterday. Obviously, machine intelligence, machine learning is top of everyone's mind today. But it's not just that, right? It's automation, it's software doing more that humans used to do. And I think, while I harbor no ideas about robots killing the idea of jobs or anything like that, it will change our relationship to work in particular. We will, new industries will come up, old industries will die, and that has a powerful impact on how our economies evolve, particularly in the area of inequality. And coming from the States, and obviously sitting here in Brazil, two massive countries that experience a lot of inequality, and that's true in our existing economy, which we kind of understand pretty well. But as technology takes over and changes our economies, it will change our relationship to work. And I think where you will see that most starkly is in things like inequality. And I don't know how to solve that problem either. And thankfully, it's not sitting on any one of our plates, because I think that's part of how society will evolve with technology that we've yet to understand, let alone have the wisdom to deal with. So those are, I would say, the three big areas that keep me up at night as someone who works in the field. And I think there are ways to apply thinking about each of those areas to any product you work on.
Well, my answer is a little bit biased because I work in the field, and the technology I want to bring up is what Matt mentioned already, that is really machine learning and machine intelligence. The technology becomes ubiquitous, especially with the Internet of Things. The amount of data that is going to be collected about the world around us and about us as human beings is tremendous. It is already tremendous. It's going just to increase in the next decade. We got at our disposal an amazing tool. People call it machine learning, machine intelligence, AI. There are many terms that are sometimes used interchangeably. These tools are extremely powerful, and in the wrong hands or with wrong intentions, they can also be extremely dangerous. And I don't think that there are enough conversations about responsibility of people that are using these technologies today to the society. As Matt mentioned, there are definitely a lot of inequalities in the world. And now we have instruments in our hands that can either do something about it, or they can just perpetuate the biases that we have, perpetuate the problems that we have. It's really easy. As Matt observed, a lot of you are on the phones, and this is something that we can do with the tools that we have at our disposal. We can really keep people hooked to the technology. And it definitely serves immediate business objectives of some companies, I guess including Google to some extent. But a decision still needs to be made, which is a conscious decision. Is this the right thing? Is this the bad thing? Is this really where we want to go? And I guess a lot of you, we had the conversations about how you apply machine intelligence, how you apply machine learning, and what kind of responsibility you should assume when making decisions about which technologies to deploy and how to present them to your potential customers and to users. So that's definitely something that we will see and hear a lot of conversations about fairness, about machine learning, about machine intelligence. You can see a lot of coverage already in the press where most of these stories are really scary stories. People talk about Terminators and killer robots. I don't work on them, by the way. And there are definitely some other things people are worried about. What's going to happen with all the jobs? Are they going to be automated in the next 10 years? And what kind of changes in societies that will cause? I don't have any answers to this. I don't think many people have, but at least these questions are now being asked, and I think that this is a very good conversation to have.
Cristina, let's hear your thoughts too. Not getting away with this. Are you building killer robots?
You already said 3, so you kind of covered the ones I was thinking. Because working in search, we're definitely very interested to know how we can build a good product for folks that are coming online for the first time and they didn't experience the whole web searching on your desktop evolution. And it's very interesting for us actually because while when the internet was starting, Google was kind of like an essential tool to get access to all this stuff. In a world where folks are coming online on their phones, we're kind of competing for attention with, Instagrams, Facebooks, things that are very addictive to scroll infinitely. And our kind of mentality of, getting the answer as fast as we can to the user or getting them in and out of our experience as fast as we can to get them to where they need to be is kind of maybe less appealing in those markets. So really understanding what kind of product can search become in these markets is a very interesting challenge at the moment. And I think you're saying you're kind of not sure is it a good thing? People are spending a lot of time in different apps and that sort of thing. My personal take, I feel like people are becoming more and more aware of that. And I feel like people do want to get away from it to some extent, or making sure they're using it for the stuff they actually care about rather than distracting them from their real life. So those were the 2 that I was going to say if you didn't go first. But yeah.
Your question.
Oh, hi. I'm working in healthcare management consulting, and I am a healthcare professional, and I link healthcare institutions and technology institutions. And I'm interested to know how about machine learning and big data in healthcare. Any news?
Well, I think there are news happening all the time. There are amazing breakthroughs happening in this field. I think we just need to be careful when reading the news in the mainstream media, because they tend to overhype the achievements and send the message that soon all the doctors will be out of jobs and the machines will do all the work for them. I don't think we're quite there yet. And I would look at this as we as an industry and we as a company, as Google and Alphabet, are creating a lot of technologies that are going to help healthcare professionals in achieving their goals faster, in scaling up faster, in bringing healthcare to the areas where it was not accessible before, and allowing to train medical professionals, for example, in rural areas in Africa, in India, in other developing countries, that will help them serve the local population better and with more expertise, and allow access to knowledge that otherwise would have been inaccessible.
That's good. It seems sensible.
Yeah, I think the real news is that we are starting to understand the class of problems that technology is useful for, right? Like pattern recognition, and how does that change diagnosis, and record management. How does that help doctors scale services, and how does that make things cheaper in the field? I think we're ages away from figuring out what to do there, but obviously it's a huge. That is probably the next game-changing arena. Let's be honest.
Thank you. Any other question? Okay, so if not, we've been talking for this past, hour and a half now? And we started covering what your day-to-day used to be like when you started working with products and how that changed over time in the life cycle of a product. We talked about learning how to say no and how to prioritize. Also, how do we balance being in a position of being the product leader, but also delegating and allowing our team to perform? And then in a more general way, what should we be paying attention to in terms of future trends and technologies? So it seems like a lot of information with different activities and expertise. So if we had to summarize, so we can all leave here with like a few things that we cannot forget when thinking about product success, how would we summarize that into a very good takeaway for these folks here on a Tuesday morning?
Okay, I'll say a few and jump in. I feel like the paramount one is kind of know your user, really understand who you're building for, how you're going to figure out if you're going in the right direction to build for them, and how you're going to have those kind of check-in points. The second one for me, I think, is also setting those goals or like directions, and trust your team to get you there, or build teams you can trust to get you there. If you're not there already, you won't be able to do everything yourself. So think of that early, how you can structure your teams or grow your teams to be in sync with you and be able to delegate and trust that they're going to grow under you and they're going to kind of take you further ahead. Are two big ones for me. I'll think of more, but...
Can I actually ask you a follow-up question to one of those?
No.
One of the things that I find the most fascinating about Cristina's job is she actually is building for users who don't look or act anything like yourself, and I'm curious about what that feels like. And we talk a lot about at Google being in a little bit of a bubble, right? And at the same time we talk about the advantages of having a diverse, inclusive team. And I was just wondering if you could just talk a little bit about knowing the user in your case was even more important than it is on a daily basis because you are not your user. And I was wondering what did that feel like, and how would you give folks advice about dealing with that kind of problem?
Yeah, that was quite a revolution, I feel, because at Google, actually, for a long time, we were, you're the user. If you can build for yourself, everyone else will kind of follow, and that sort of mindset. So figuring out that, wait a minute, there's like people in other parts of the world that are different than how we are was quite a huge cultural shift. And I think that the only way to really start understanding that is kind of the importance I mentioned about immersions, what we call immersions, but really kind of spend a lot of time with the people you're trying to build for. Regardless of what you're building, just watch them go about their lives or their jobs, whatever you're kind of trying to build for. Any one of those immersions, like whenever we try to send, obviously there's quite expensive sending people to different countries and that sort of thing, but we try to send as many different people from our team there, because even though we bring back a huge chunk of research and videos and look, this is everything that we learned, it can never be as challenging all your assumptions as it is when you're actually there and you can ask that follow-up question like, and you really do this? Like, have you really not tried this ever before? Have you not seen this? I think that's kind of the biggest, most effective way of getting that culture change. Is that?
Well, to summarize, we have discussed indeed, as Manu mentioned, a lot of various things, and you've heard a lot of advice. I'm not sure if all of that will be applicable in your daily lives when you go back to your companies and you have to deal with the daily struggles. I think one of the most important things will be to be the most organized person in the room, to make sure that you always know what is important, and to communicate that well to the rest of the team. Because essentially, that is the most challenging, but the most important part of the work of the product leader. You need to indicate the direction, and you need to know that this direction is at least roughly correct. If you have a clear sense of direction and you can share it with the rest of the team, then the team will follow, and you will be amazed how much they can achieve by just being pointed in the right direction.
Ivan is definitely the most organized person on this panel. I don't have a ton to add, actually. I mean, I think Cristina and Ivan said it really, really well. Through my career, I think I've been surprised about how important it is to prioritize people over the work. Who you surround yourself with, and critically the environment that you create for them, tends to be a far bigger determinant of success than any of the 51-49 decisions that you make. And I think, with large confidence, looking back on my career, I could choose a team of people and we could jump into some field that we know nothing about. And I actually would feel good about our ability to do something really positive. And I think that's when you know that you're probably heading down the right path. The other thing I would say is, and I think it's sort of the title of this talk, is, just build things that matter. Solve problems worth solving. I have great respect for anyone who plays in the startup game, but I have an even greater respect for people who are trying to bring positive change rather than just make getting your laundry done more easy. So I think having a real passion for solving some of humanity's biggest problems. I mean, healthcare came up, other fields. You'll have my unlimited admiration for taking on those big challenges. And then maybe one more thing is, try not to feel the highs too high and the lows too low. Certainly, having spent 2 weeks with all of you, it's a very stressful environment, right? Especially running from thing to thing. We were even stressed about whether we had anything to offer you at all in terms of advice or experience. But the mistakes you make, the wrong decisions you make, they're not going to matter in the long run. So enjoy the ride, and we wish you all the best of luck.
Thank you for bringing all these different perspectives, which shows us that even though the level of organization and methods and process can be a little different, there's always that common passion into actually building things that get better along the way and also that generate more impact. And there are many different ways of doing that. So thanks for showing us that. Thank you for bringing your questions and participating in this conversation. This chat will be available at our YouTube channel, so if you want to go over and revisit some of the topics that we brought up, thank you very much. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Manu.